So thank you very much to Trizia and John from the National Lottery to speaking to us today about funding. They will have a funding presentation and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. Trizia is the funding officer for Bromley and Croydon, so I think she may have spoken to a few of you, and she's certainly keen to share information with the rest of you because it's her role to really promote and extend how many organisations are able to make use of the Reaching Communities Fund in particularly. I've got John Jatto, who is the funding manager for South London, who I think is going to lead us through the presentation. They will be talking about the range of funding available from through the National Lottery, including Awards for All, and many of you will have seen that there are some rather exciting changes with that, and I'm sure this will become clear in the presentation, the Awards for All funding is managed on a national level from a national team, so it's a different process, but I'm here to give you some support with that as well, and John and Trizia will talk through the best ways to get started with that. One other thing just to let you know about, because it's happening this week, I'm going to be helping to administer a winter health fund, which is funding that CVA is managing for the NHS locally. I'll send that out to you. It's a very small fund, but I know many of you received some of that funding last year, so it's a continuation of that programme. So I'll send that out to you as soon as we've got all that paperwork ready. If you could put yourselves onto mute, there's a bit of a sort of feedback from somebody. Maybe if you're not on mute, perhaps you could mute for me. We will have an opportunity for questions. If those could go in the chat function, I think that's easier for me to sort of pull out those main ones. So we'll try and do it that way once the presentation has finished and we're ready to go into a bit more detail. Trizia and John are able to give you support after this event. So just bear in mind, you know, we may not, how is your question going to be very specific for yourself, or is it going to be something more useful for the group? If it's very specific, maybe hold on to that and follow up later on today or a later date. If it's something that you feel will broadly help the rest of us, you know, that would be great. That would be good for the focus for the questions. Enough from me, I think. John, Trizia, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. We're looking forward to hearing more.
Okay. So I'll share the screen with the presentation and hopefully you can all see that now. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Here we go.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Trizia. Thank you, Helen, as well for the introduction. I won't, or Hilary, sorry, for the introduction. I won't repeat what you said. But good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending the Funders Fair today. As I said, my name is John Jatto. I'm the funding manager for South London at the National Lottery Community Fund. Here to talk to you today about a few of our funding programs with the aim of giving you a bit of a better understanding of our processes. And as you saw, I'm here with my colleague Trizia Wells, who is the funding officer for Croydon and Bromley as well. If we go into the agenda, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the fund and a quick overview of our new strategy. Then I'll return to our main funding offers in England, explain who and what we fund and how to apply as well. So we're one of the largest funders in the UK. The income of all the lottery distributors comes from the sale of national lottery tickets. Of every £2 spent on a lottery ticket, 56 pence or 28% goes to good causes. National lottery players contribute around 30 million a week to good causes. The National Lottery Community Fund distributes around 600 million a year, so a large pot of funding across the United Kingdom to across all countries. And we're a non-departmental public body, so we're at arm's length from the government, although we are ultimately accountable to Parliament as we are spending public funds. If we go to the next slide. So a little bit about our strategy. So it starts with communities. So our 2030 strategy makes clear our ambition to deliver funding that strengthens society and improves lives across the UK. We'll distribute about 4 billion by 2030, and we'll support activities that create resilient communities and communities that are more inclusive and environmentally sustainable. It starts with communities being shaped by what has been heard through conversations with communities, civil society organisations and others in 2022. And that involved over 18,000 interaction, both internally and externally wider across the sector. So as a fund, we're looking to make a big difference in the coming years. And as such, we're in a transition year. Strategy has not yet been operationalized, but there's lots of work going on. And by the summer of 2024, it should be fully operationalized. I guess what that means for groups is there's not much to think about right now as far as changes, but those changes are coming and they are on our website available for you guys to see and view and to become versed with, but no actions to take as of yet. Anyone applying to us for RC partnerships will be assessed in the usual way, so don't worry too much about changes at the moment. Next slide, please.
Bear with me.
It's okay.
Why is this now? There we go.
There you go. So we're supporting communities to tackle, so a bit about our community-led missions, I should say that, the title was there, but we're supporting communities to tackle the challenges they face, so strengthening our grassroots funding. We've set 4 community-led missions where we'll focus funding, learning and our efforts. Our funders always supported the mission areas on screen at the moment, and now we're going further and just bringing a renewed focus to making a bigger impact. Our new strategy has its foundation in our previous learning. Our work still aims to support communities to build from their strengths. We still support what matters most to different communities, including long-term investments to address deep-rooted challenges. And of course, we're keeping our local, relational, and strength-based approach with a commitment to support communities to shape their own future. We have 4 community-led missions that you can see on our screen. So I won't read them out. Next slide. So focus on our grassroots community funding. We've listened, heard and reflected about the value of our grassroots community funding. So the first operational change you'll see is that in 14 days, so on the 15th of November, we'll double the size of our awards for grants to £20,000 over a period of 2 years. So as I say, this will launch on November the 15th, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, National Lottery Awards for All is open as usual, and if you wish to apply for £10,000 or under, you don't have to wait till that date. You can apply under our current programme criteria, which I'll cover today. If you do apply, obviously that will have some meaning to groups as far as their ability to apply down the line. So I'll cover that in future slides as well. Next slide. So who we support. So, I mean, it goes without saying, our funding's open to all communities, but we'll invest most in those with the greatest need. We'll take an equity-based approach, investing most in places, people and community who experience poverty, disadvantage and discrimination. We try to listen and use evidence to target our resources to help communities overcome barriers and achieve their potential. And our work aims to support communities to build from their strengths. And we'll continue to support what matters most to different communities, including long-term investment to address, as I said earlier, those deep-rooted challenges in communities. And I'll go on to our England funding on the next slide. So as I said, we've externally launched our new strategy. It starts with community, that's our tagline. And I've shared with you our direction of travel over the next 7 years. It's a signal that we'll be changing, but there aren't any immediate changes to our England funding programs, as I said earlier, except for Awards for All. So over the next coming year, we'll be reviewing our funding offer in England as far as reaching communities and partnerships, and we'll expect to launch this in April 2024. As I say, in the meantime, you can still apply through national awards floors and reaching communities and partnership programs which remain open. We know it can feel a bit daunting to hear that we're reviewing our funding offer, but we plan to work sensitively, flexibly, and responsively with applicants and communities, and you don't have to rush to get an application in at the moment. Our reaching communities and partnerships applications can take around 6 to 9 months to get a decision. We'll transition our pipeline compassionately, so when the time comes, we'll clearly message this externally, so our journey towards the new portfolio will be very gradual. And I'll run through our current open programs now. Ooh, okay, we are on there. Perfect. So we have 3 main funding priorities in England, which came out of discussions with our grant holders, stakeholders, and organisations across the voluntary sector. And we've asked them where they think we add most value and what's important for their communities. These priorities are the same for all England funding open programs. Strong relationships, shared and sustainable places and spaces, and early action to prevent problems and tackle inequalities. So if we go to the next slide, I'll walk us through our funding offer now. And all our programs can be found on our website, which I'll provide to you at the end. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Awards for All. National Awards Lottery Awards for All is our most popular program in England, and as I've shared earlier, we'll be making some changes to this program from the 15th. So from that point, you'll be able to apply for up to £20,000 and take up to 2 years to deliver that project. Currently, though, the grants program is £300 up to £10,000 for 1 year. And you can only hold one grant for a maximum of £10,000 within a 12-month period. Even once the funding amount changes, though, however, priority groups with smaller incomes will be our focus. Applications must show meaningful community involvement and planning and delivery of work. Organisations can't apply to other programs with the same project over the same period if you're awaiting a decision. And applications are online using a response to 3 questions. So as Hilary said earlier, that's a central program managed in Newcastle and Birmingham. And you answer 3 questions. There isn't any follow-up from the team. So it's important that you answer those questions to the best of your knowledge and understanding at the time. You can apply at any time, and decisions are typically within 12 weeks. And I must add, at the moment, due to volume of applications being received from organisations, if you are part of an organisation with an income over 250k, unfortunately, at the moment, you are unlikely to be successful with Awards for All, as we prioritise groups with smaller incomes at the moment. We regularly say no to good projects, and the volume of applications consistently exceeds the amount of funding that we have to offer, unfortunately. Just to touch on a few other programs, we've also been supporting some key national moments via our Awards for All funding. So we awarded 2.3 million to groups and organisations to bring people together around and celebrate the King's coronation. So 252k also went to Eurovision projects with a particular focus around Ukrainian communities, and will continue to fund such projects throughout the year. We also awarded 750k to community groups who wanted to support the 75th anniversary of Windrush, and we've held a lot of online application clinics to support this activity, and we'll continue to fund that also throughout the year, particularly around this last month, should I say, Black History Month, Carnival, and also heritage applications as well. If we go on to the next slide, so this is now our reaching communities and partnerships. This is managed by our regional teams, and this is where myself and Trizia sit. So the rest of the presentation is more focused on reaching communities and partnerships. We can fund individual organisations. So RC and partnerships is aimed at organisations and communities with an aspiration to work on larger proposals, obviously, as opposed to awards for all for sort of smaller groups and shorter term projects. We fund individual organizations or partnerships with a shared set of goals to help their community, whether that's the community living in the same area or people with the same interests or life experiences. In terms of reaching communities, grants are for £10,000, running for up to 5 years. You can apply at any time as well. So this is an open rolling program, and applications are online with other formats available that support accessibility in terms of applying. We are a flexible funder in what we can fund. So whether your organization needs long-term or shorter-term funding, whether your request is for a particular activity or to create more fundamental change, or whether the funding is to support a single organization, or as I said earlier, to bring organizations together. We can support organizations with activity as well as core costs. So funding your overheads, we can fund expansion of existing projects, as well as the development of new ways of working. We can cover costs for sharing learning and showing EDI and impact, or should I say showing learning and impact, demonstrating community cohesion, EDI development.
How are you, Dennis?
Sorry.
Where's Bobby?
It should be always Borat, you know.
I'm okay.
We'll wait and just get it.
Yeah, one moment. Is that Brandon who's?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, could you mute for us, please?
Yeah.
Let me know. I'm happy to continue. Cool. Where was we? So yes, we can fund expansion, as I was saying, of existing projects, as well as the development of new ways of working. And we can cover costs for sharing learning, showing impact, demonstrating community cohesion, EDI development, lived experience leadership, establishing partnerships with community stakeholders, anything that kind of develops your organizations and supports you to progress to the next stage. So there's a mix of different things that you can apply for within a proposal. And that will also always be hooked on, obviously, the work that you do and the impact the organization has within the local community. We can also support, as I say, to support organizations to focus on their financial, strategic, or operational planning and or restructuring. And as I say, with that, if you're focusing proposals around those particular things, it will always be asked around the overall impact of the organization on the community also as well. And that would need to be demonstrated within any application also. Shall we go to the next slide? Who can apply? So this slide is relevant to both Awards for All and Reaching Communities and Partnerships. So I'll give you a moment to have a look at the slide as far as who can apply. We welcome applications from groups supporting communities that we haven't been able to reach sufficiently previously, and or who traditionally have or had poorer outcomes as well, taking an equitable approach. And just a gentle reminder, as it also states on our website, if you're an unincorporated groups, it might be appropriate for you to incorporate, and we suggest that you explore this and consider the implications that unincorporation can have on yourselves, particularly, but also on the organization. Next slide, please. So again, a little bit of detail around some of the questions that we'll ask you. If you're applying for reaching communities and partnership, I guess what I can say whilst we're on this slide and people are having a look at some of those questions, reaching communities and partnerships, whilst they're identified separately, they are part of one program. And if you apply for reaching communities, or if you are looking to apply for partnership, it is through reaching communities, and you're just suggesting within the application that this is a formal partnership within groups. And we do distinguish between formal partnerships versus groups who work in partnership with other organizations, but perhaps this is not particularly a formal partnership. You can have signposting and have other relationships with organizations that don't have to be formal partnerships. But if you are working particularly together on a proposal or on a piece of work, then you can just state within the proposal that this is a formal partnership and these are the different roles of the organizations. And I guess it should be also said that within partnerships, all of those organizations should add value to the proposal that makes the partnership greater than the sum of its parts, essentially. Just a quick scan over some of those questions: what your organization does, what you'd like to do, where your work will take place, how you'll involve community. I guess that question in particular talks around putting people in the lead, how you've engaged people before putting the proposal into the National Lottery, how you plan to continue to engage people once the proposal started, and that might be perhaps making adaptations based on what you've heard back from your beneficiaries. And it might be important to state how you engage in those communities. So whether it be focus groups, questionnaires, surveys, one-to-one conversations, because that element can be relative when contrasting with other organizations. So we don't often say that organizations don't have community involvement, but it can be said that other organizations have more, stronger, or better quality community engagement versus other organizations or other proposals that sit within panels at any one time. Some new questions that are not on the screen there are information about the number of staff and volunteers, including lived experience of staff. So we'll always ask that. And we'll also ask for main and senior contact details. So senior contact details being legally responsible contacts that are either directors or trustees listed on Companies House or the Charities Commission. Next slide, please. So the application process to apply for reaching communities and partnerships, you should visit our website, and once your initial idea is received, you'll receive an acknowledgement email. We then aim to get back in touch in around 12 weeks with feedback, and if we're interested in your idea, we'll ask for more information and for you to submit a full proposal. Organizations can work at their own pace to submit further information, but we generally recommend this taking about 6 to 8 weeks so we can keep our internal pipelines moving and make sure we are getting funding out to communities. Once complete, you're asked to confirm the proposal was complete, and then all full proposals go before a decision-making panel, and the aim is for it to go before a panel within 12 weeks of receiving that full proposal back. So minus the part in between when you're working, the total process is 24 weeks, depending on how long groups take to put together their full proposal in between as well. So slightly more than 24 weeks, but sometimes that can be with an additional 3 months, some groups 2 months, some groups 1 month, some groups even longer than that in between. And that, I guess, depends on the capacity of the individual groups at times, and we're quite flexible with that. However, we do like to keep our pipelines moving and our funding, as I say, going out to communities. Next slide, please. So as I say, you can develop your application at your own pace. Tell us about your proposal in your own format, and we'll let you know if we need anything else. The information will depend on the complexity and the scale of your proposal, and we'll aim to let you know our final decision, as I say, within 12 weeks. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about safeguarding, which is the responsibility of all organisations. The fund doesn't take responsibility for safeguarding with organisations. However, all grant holders do need to have a tailored safeguarding policy in place that explains how anyone involved in the activity will be safe. And if we do fund your organisations, you must comply with our safeguarding policy. We're now taking into account different ways of working as well. So we're looking at adult safeguarding policies, children's safeguarding policies, and potentially digital safeguarding policies, particularly since the move towards a lot of online work since COVID-19. Next slide. Final slide. If you're successful, you'll receive an offer letter via email, and we'll ask you to return your offer letter with a bank statement within 1 month. You have 6 months from the offer letter date to begin your project. You do not have to start it immediately. However, there should be good reasons as to why it's not starting, I guess, pretty soon after the offer letter is received. And you'll have a full grant setup meeting with your funding officer. And there's lots of useful information on our website that can also support you as well. During the support and learning aspect of it, so the almost monitoring of the grant, which we now do in some cases once a year, in some cases twice a year, and in some cases more, depending on the application, but generally once a year. During that support and learning, we're asking how you've involved people in the community, as I said earlier, the difference the funding has made and is making, what you're learning as an organization from this funding, how you're spending the funding as well. So we'll ask for a bit of a data capture of a spend against the agreed budgets, and how the grant is supporting the organization and the organization's future plans. That, I believe, is the end. If you go to the next slide, we are happy to take any questions. Yes, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. There's less people have been able to join us today than I initially thought. So if you have a question, we may be able to manage it with putting your hand up and asking. Let me just. We're sorry about the sound quality. I think everybody is.
There's wind coming from someone's microphone.
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone is muted, but I have a couple of questions. So if you don't mind, everyone, I'll start and then take advantage of me hosting. Just following on there from the kind of monitoring that you're doing, and you're explaining about those support sessions with reaching communities. Do you know how much monitoring is required for Awards for All?
So was you about to jump in? Go on, Trizia. You know more than me, I'm sure.
Yeah, you correct me if I'm wrong, but for Awards for All, there's no, with it being at the moment a yearly program, so the grant spent within a year, there's no ongoing monitoring. But at the end of the project, you're obviously asked to let us know how you got on. I think that's in the form of a written report, very broad report, and then there's a random selection of grants to follow up and have a more in-depth review, which is quite different to reaching communities. So the Awards for All monitoring is much more light touch.
Yeah. I think it's also important to say, though, on that as well, that groups should keep all information and receipts about their projects for 7 years, because you can be contacted at any time for 7 years after your project and asked about how it's gone. And that's in the terms and conditions. Same with reaching communities and Awards for All. So organizations should keep hold of data around projects for a period of time. As Trizia said, random selections can and do happen often.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. Yes, and certainly that link back to it being public money. You know, people have bought their lottery tickets, need to be able to account for it. So yeah, that's great. I think one of my thoughts for asking that question is it's always about how much time people can have for their project, and particularly when we are involving quite a few volunteers, people giving their time, maybe trustees getting involved in it, writing applications. And so I'm going to ask a really difficult question, which I know you're not going to be able to answer, but if you're applying to reaching communities, what are your chances of getting funded? Is it kind of like 1 in 10 applicants? Is it 1 in 50 applicants? As I say, I know you're not going to give me a straight answer, but I just feel I need to ask that.
Yeah. In South London, I think off the top of my head, it's I want to say around 40%.
Yeah.
I was going to say, from the data that I've recently seen, and that's literally our most recent data as far as this financial year, in the first 2 quarters, it's been around 40%. So that's kind of, I guess, the statistical answer to that. In terms of why that is and why groups may be unsuccessful and some others, obviously the volume of applications is enormous. Funding officers regularly are always assessing ideas. There's always ideas in the pipeline. There's never not a moment that you're not assessing ideas throughout the year, whilst obviously managing grants, whilst obviously doing also stakeholder engagement, things like this as well. So in terms of how and why maybe things are unsuccessful, those are particular to those individual projects, and it would be difficult to say why generally across the board things are unsuccessful, other than we regularly say to really good projects purely because of the volume.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very open, and I think that's important for people to know about the time that they're putting into this and the realities of what that looks like. My final question, and then I can see some in the chat, so we'll go to that. You were talking about obviously prioritizing areas where there's poverty, disadvantage, discrimination. What sort of do people need to evidence that in their applications, or is that, I mean, you have that information about what that is? So how much of an application needs to be dedicated to saying our community, you know, suffers from discrimination, therefore we're doing this? What's the balance there?
It's funny that you say that, because that seems like an obvious question, but that's the first time I've had that question, and I always try and answer that question because it's a great question. And I always say to groups, as you've kind of said, we all watch the news, we all kind of know what is going on in communities and what the needs are. So I always advise groups not to spend too much time talking about, for example, in Croydon, we all know about the knife crime incidents that have happened recently. We receive applications that will have lots of time dedicated to that particular incident or to particular incidences. And for me, it's time in that question where you could have spent writing more about the particular project. So I would write give some context. And if you are giving context, I would give it very particularly to your neighborhood and maybe not wider than that. So giving context directly to where you are and how you might be able to support that directly, and maybe not going too wider than that. And as far as statistics around, for example, things like knife crime and homelessness and other things, I would potentially leave that out, because, as I say, we understand all of that. We don't deny that those things exist. We know they exist. For us, it's more important that groups spend time telling us why they are best placed to support that and to move that forward.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to the chat questions. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing names wrong. Real one, you said it's your first time applying. Is there support or a template format? So online, whether it's Awards for All or Reaching Communities, that's how you'll make the application. So there is a template. Absolutely, and good example, you know, good information there about what's expected. So I think we can say I will make sure that the websites are shared following this meeting. Check on there first if there's any confusion around how to fill that in. You can pop a question to me, or if it's relevant to John or Trizia there. So yes, there are templates basically. Okay, Jill has asked if we're applying to another grant and other funders at the same time, how do we share that information with you?
One line in your proposal would be fine, just to kind of state what it is that you're applying for. In terms of other funders, you don't necessarily need to say that you're applying to other funders unless you are applying for the exact same thing, which we do also understand that happens at times. Groups have to seek funding from a number of different places. So I guess in that sense, transparency is key. So if you are applying in multiple places for the same thing, you can state that. And maybe you could also state if you're happy for us to potentially have conversations with other funders as well, if that is the case. But if you are applying for multiple programs that we hold, then you should make that clear within your application. Again, it's not that we don't like it, or it's not normal. It's just demonstrating a little bit of transparency and openness around what you're kind of applying for. And if you are applying for multiple programs at the fund, as with other funders, it's important that you're applying for different things, different costings, and you're not applying for the same things at the same time.
Jill, does that answer your question? Is that? Yeah, okay. Okay, Mark has asked, awards for all. Could funding be awarded for running costs? For example, a food bank asking for funding to buy food.
I'm not aware of any reason why not.
Yeah, I was going to say technically you can. I would always advise to add more to a proposal than just the costings for the food, potentially, particularly around food banks, because we do fund a lot of food banks, and I guess funders like to see that. Yes, we're distributing food, but there is also some kind of wraparound element to it potentially as well. And even if it is as limited as signposting, making that clear within a proposal definitely adds value.
And perhaps I would suggest that, I mean, there's some very innovative, I know people worry about that word, always starting from brand new, but, you know, there are different ways that food banks have developed partnerships and are looking to secure their foods that they have donations for. So, you know, if I was working with an organisation around an awards for all food bank application, yes, it's something I would feel that you could include, because you've always got, first thing, you've got to make sure that you've got that food there for people. But how else are you supplementing that? What other partnerships are you working on to ensure that you've got that food there? What other ways are you involving the community so that there's food sharing and things like that going on, as well as awards for all money that can be used to make sure that all the staples are there and there's consistency in what you're delivering. So I suppose, yes, we say the answer there is yes, but bear in mind that lots of people are putting in applications. What makes yours stand out?
Cool.
Great. Okay. And John was asking about, again, for awards for all, but actually I imagine this is important, would work for reaching communities as well, in terms of a question about the types of community engagement that are recommended. What do you feel really stands out in an application when people are saying that they've involved their community in the development of a project idea?
Well, it's really about looking at the particular community that project's aiming to benefit and what works for them in terms of engagement. We do, when applications come in, we do really look for that community voice, to know that the people who are going to benefit from the project have had a voice in shaping it, have had a hand in shaping it, and it's not something that's just been plonked on top of them, but it's genuinely coming from the community need. And how that's expressed is going to vary, I expect, with different communities. So there's no one hard and fast way of doing that, but just making sure that voice comes through. Yeah,
and I guess some examples, I guess basic elements, people do things like, so we get a lot of applications where people say they are asking people in the community, and that can be on the high street, just talking to people. And actually we do get a lot of applications that state that. We asked the local community, we went to the high street and we stopped people and we talked to a number of people, and that's fine. And that's a very basic element of people in the lead and putting people in the lead. But as Trizia was saying, we'd like it to be particularly focused to beneficiaries that you are looking to kind of serve and support. And so again, other examples people have are things like focus groups, where they specifically target their potential beneficiaries and ask them those particular questions, questionnaires, other organizations within the local community, and maybe seeking out some of their beneficiaries and making sure that can potentially go far and wide. One-to-one conversations people have, and again, so there's a number of different ways. How different groups articulate that, I guess, is down to them. And as I said earlier, it was always relative. So you can imagine an application coming in from a group, and they say we went to the high street and spoke to 60 people who may or may not use their project, versus we spoke to 60 people who are part of X, Y, and Z organization, who are already beneficiaries, who are already, we know, are dealing with this issue, and so have key answers to this question, or maybe some valuable knowledge or information. We had one-to-ones with half of them. We had focus groups with 20 of them, as I say, versus the first example. So, and then there are groups that do a little bit more. And again, for us, it's proportionality. So we don't expect all groups to speak to the whole borough, but we expect them to have had meaningful conversations with their prospective beneficiaries, and demonstrated, one, that they've done it, but two, also how they've done it, and two, to what degree they have done it.
And really, the outcome of those conversations links to the proposal.
Yeah.
So that we don't see an application that says our community said their issue would be best dealt with in this way, but we're going to do it in that way, so that there's a clear link between what the community is saying they need and what the proposal is proposing to do.
I think one of the difficulties organisations have is the investment that they have to put in to even get to the stage where they can make an application. So, you know, some of those things you've talked about, that's a lot of manpower, person power. That's you know, if you're going to bring people together into a room, there's a lot of costs around that. So just to say, you know, I hear day in, day out, well, how do we even get started with that? So then my answer, if I, you know, is being a bit clever with some of the other little things that are out there, back to my winter health grant. You know, if you were successful with that and ran a couple of events, you could also use those events as an opportunity to talk to the people that are coming in. So thinking about what you've already got going on, or where you're going to be, or organisations that you have worked with in the past that you could go and speak with their members, because I do appreciate that it can be difficult even just to, yeah, get those questions out there to people in order to put that together.
I guess, and the interesting thing is the way you describe it, Hilary, is actually very good, because what that also demonstrates is an organization that's always thinking about that. So not just saying, all right, we want to start a new project, we want to go out and speak to people, but actually we're running projects. Let's speak to the people that we're actually currently serving about what they might need next. And that demonstrates that as well, which is a perfect example.
Yeah. Okay, Lydia is asking about Awards for All. So it sounds like it's a brand new group, not had any other projects, not had any other funding coming in, going out. Would that be okay?
That would be okay, and that's what we advise groups to go and seek out Awards for All first. And I guess the part of the reason why it's gone up is so it can eventually act as a bit of a bridging gap between Awards for All and reaching communities. So a little bit of demonstration of managing funds, successful projects for Awards for All over a period of time, and then potentially looking to apply for awards for reaching communities. It's also possible to do that in the case of reaching communities. However, as you can imagine, you would have to do a lot of demonstrations around the governance of the organization, the experience of the people within the organizations, within the sector. We definitely fund new organizations in reaching communities. However, obviously, as you can imagine, the criteria for those groups would be higher just because of the larger amounts of funds, and I guess the risks that the fund are prepared to take, but with certain mitigations.
And I suppose also back to the knowing your community. If you're brand new, you know, what's your history within the community? Where's that come from? Though, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking your organisation might be a result of being part of the community and knowing that that's where the gap is. So again, it's just explaining, being able to be very clear about how that's being developed.
In Awards for All, you're much more likely to be funded in that way than reaching communities. It's generally not an issue within Awards for All. It just needs to be a demonstration of how embedded and how this group has come about. And if that can be explained quite clearly, which in a lot of cases it can, then it's fine.
Yeah, and generally, when we're talking to organisations about developing their funding, we talk about, you know, building on and being able to use your previous funding to demonstrate what you're able to achieve, what the impact has been, and then that gives you the next stepping stone. So, you know, that's how I talk to people about it, as being kind of stepping stones to getting up to those larger projects, and also just the ability of the organisation to manage larger amounts of money as well. I think it's, you don't need to go for the £20,000 first. You know, start with what you can manage and what's actually going to make a difference to you, and particularly if people are doing this voluntary and not planning on taking any payment for time for people, then, you know, it's quite hard to spend £20,000 on without any staffing costs. So think genuinely about what the costs are as well. There's another question here, just checking the turnaround time, where we think you said about 24 weeks for that would be the reaching communities.
Yep, minus the time in the middle when groups are working on their full stage proposal. So sometimes that can be 24 weeks in the middle if groups take that particular amounts of times to develop their full stage proposal. Because at full stage, so idea. So again, that's where we're saying be very efficient with the information you're submitting the first time around. You don't have to put loads and loads of details. You just have to be kind of just be measured in terms of what it is you want to get across around your idea and why you want to do it and how you've engaged the local community. Then at second stage, if we're successful, if it goes through to the first stage and we ask for more information, then you'll get into the kind of nuts and bolts of the proposal. We'll ask for your budgets, and we'll ask you to budget for the whole period of the proposal. We'll ask you to develop a full stage proposal. This is only for reaching communities, not for Awards for All. So a full kind of program of how you're going to deliver this piece of work. We'll ask for information around safeguarding, around environment, around your your current financial situation. We'll ask you how potentially the project fits in with our priorities, more detail potentially about how you've engaged the community. As you've described, Hilary, groups haven't got loads and loads of capacity, even the larger groups. So we're quite understanding in that. Yes, our process is 24 weeks, 12 weeks, and 12 weeks, but in the middle, sometimes groups can take 12 weeks. We advise 12 weeks. Sometimes groups can take 24 weeks. That's okay. Sometimes it's a bit longer and we get a bit tetchy and start to call them in. But we are quite flexible with timelines. As more so, it's important that groups communicate. Hi, we know you're expecting this proposal, but actually capacity at the moment is quite low. We need X amount of time, and we will definitely be coming back to you with a proposal, or with our full stage proposal. And as long as we are able to keep communicating with groups, then we're happy to kind of keep that process open. Sometimes when we don't have communication with groups and when we don't hear from them, then we can begin a bit of a process of withdrawing the proposal. And sometimes that can sound really negative, but sometimes that can be the best thing to do, because again, if you've applied for that idea and you're planning to you want to apply for that thing, you can always just resubmit that same idea when the time is more appropriate for you as an organization. So not the worst thing if proposals are withdrawn and resubmitted either.
So there's just a follow-on comment saying it's very long, is the comment there. But I think you've gone into the reasons why, you know, in terms of the detail that you're then looking for in that.
Yeah, I mean, it is very long, but I guess in terms of reaching communities, you're talking about upwards £200,000-400,000 go into groups at any one time. There's no top end limit to reaching communities as far as what you can apply for. We don't put a number on the top because, as you said earlier, we ask groups to apply for what they feel they need, and sometimes that can be 100k. And for example, with that, we'd be proportionate. So yes, all those questions we are asking, but we wouldn't expect the same level of detail in your answers if you're applying for something like 100, 150k versus 500k. Proposals over 500k have an extra step, so we'll expect a little bit more detail there as well. And so, but we do take a proportionate approach to that. So again, submit what you feel is sufficient, and if funding officers have further questions, they're more definitely inclined to ask those questions.
Great. Any other questions? Lydia's asked about how both awards for all and reaching communities are monitored. So if I just, let me see if I've got it right, because you did talk about it earlier. So awards for all, at the moment, it's a 1-year award. It's changing to a 2-year award. It will be at the end of the funding period. There'll be some kind of written report that you submit back, but hold on to your records because they could be asked for over a 7-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And reaching communities, I think you called them, what did you call them? Learning and support sessions that happen, and that would be agreed at the time of the funding agreement being done. And
the default really is to have a 6-month session in the first year and thereafter annually, but it's very much between what the funding officer wants to offer, on the basis of what the organisation needs. So I have some grants who want a quarterly review, which is quite frequent. That's fine. A lot of mine are annual, and then some are 6 months. So it does depend. But those reviews at the end of each year, there will again be a written report expected, so a progress report and a budget report at the end of each year, and then at the end of the project, whether it's 2, 3, or 5 years, there'll be a sort of a whole report on the progress and how things have gone, and going back to the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve in the beginning.
And are there templates for that?
No, that information there's a template for the budget, but the progress report is, that can be in any form that suits the organisation.
And there's guidance on our website as to what to place in there and what we're looking for. And
dare I say, think about how else that can be used. That's a great thing to be able to share with supporters, to be able to share with future funders, to have on your website. So make it a useful document, or however you produce it. Again, thinking about the time needed, it sounds to me like you would need to make sure that somebody has time allocated to make sure that those reports are got everything they need and are looking good. So what else are you doing with that? Make it work for you.
And to say that as well is to also say, within reaching communities, again, as far as applications and costings, that can be included within the costings as well. So it can be included within the costings around potentially independent evaluations, getting external organizations to come in, and we're happy to support funding that. Because again, when we talk about sustainability, as you said, those reports can be taken to other funders, and you can share those and share the learnings and use that to get more funding and more support from other places as well. So we're more than happy to support costings around evaluations and support and learning, that we now call it.
Great. Okay, thank you. I hope there's a lot of people thinking, oh dear, we've got some work to do because we're going to make this application. That's what I want. I think it's clear from Croydon Voluntary Action point of view that we would really like more organisations to be making more reaching communities and partnership applications. We think that there's a real need for that funding to be drawn into Croydon. Obviously, John has taken the time, and Trizia as well, to speak to us. Clearly, there's support for applications to come from Croydon. You can see the process is very much that starting process for reaching communities is give us some information and we will respond to you and let you know if this is something you should do some further work on. So looking at the organisations in front of me, there's several of you that I think could really make a start on that, and it's worth starting on that journey. there's a few others that I don't know so well, perhaps, or I know that you're perhaps a smaller organisation, and the awards for all, I mean, it's fantastic that that amount is doubling. What an opportunity. And again, that process, I'll send out the link today, have a look at that website. It's a really intuitive one just to get going with. So, you know, I'm appealing to you to take the time to look into that. One more question's just popped up here. Let me have a read of it. Do you know if the awards for all application process will stay the same with the 3-question format when it goes up to the 20,000, or do you think that's changing? Do you know that?
Yes, I do know that. And the answer is that the application, the questions will, I'm sorry, I've just had a message from John that his computer's randomly shut down. So yes, the questions will remain the same. Very straightforward. There aren't as many as there are for reaching communities, and that will remain the same.
Yeah,
but
well, that's great, because it's such an accessible funding program. It's really worth having a look at, putting that information into the questions. And yes, let's see how much we can get going in Croydon, how much we can continue to have going on in Croydon. Great. If there's no other questions, I think we'll finish there. So we have recorded it, and we will be sharing that. I'll also share some links with you today. Thank you very much to John and Trizia. So one last question. So Jacqueline has just asked, they're a medium-sized charity with an income of over 250,000. Do they qualify for the grants? So I think with the awards for all grant, you may not be at the for that, but
certainly for reaching communities. And at the moment, because of the volume of applications for awards for all, they're not entertaining applications from organisations with over 250,000. But certainly for reaching communities, absolutely.
Great. So there we go. Take the opportunity, Jacqueline, get that information in there, and you'll hear back. And yeah, can progress from there. I'd love to hear from any of you if you're thinking of putting in the application. If I don't have many hours that I can dedicate to this work, but if I can, I'm happy to look at those answers to those 3 questions for the awards for all and just give you my very quick thoughts on that. And then you know that there's extra support available in the process for the reaching communities and the partnership funding. So thank you very much. Lovely to see you all. And thank you, John and Trizia. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.